everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Canadian Podcast. I'm Sarah Sash, and I'm joined by my colleague and fellow farmer out there in Ontario, Andrew Campbell. How's your summer been, Andrew?
You know what? It's amazing how we're in the middle of summer, basically the halfway point as we switch from July to August, and I feel like I have not stopped doing anything, and somehow haven't gotten anything done that I wanted to over the summer. Like every summer before it, this is exactly the story, but it has actually been good. A few days at the cottage, just got back from that, we finished up third cut just actually this afternoon. Things are rocking. How's things in BC?
Good. Just, a lot of things are on fire again, so we should not overlook that. But I think that's becoming a bit more common, so at least we're a little bit prepared for it. But still, a lot of compassion for the folks who are dealing with that sort of stuff. And it hasn't been that hot, I wouldn't say. Like, it has been hot, but I haven't gone in my pool yet this year. So I don't know what you'd call that, but it's all right. Yeah, corn looks good.
But like at least a trip or two away from the farm. You're usually away somewhere in the summer.
Yeah, well, I did make the trip out to Moncton for the AGM, which was fantastic. Got to see a little bit of the Maritimes and poke around there, which I'd never really done before, other than when I went to Newfoundland for a previous AGM. But it's kind of in and out. So I went to the lobster capital of the world, I think it was, Shediac. So I went there, enjoyed meeting all the people in the New Brunswick area that joined the meeting, and I've just been over to the UK actually to visit my friend and had a chance to visit a giant milk plant while I was there, so that was pretty cool. Toured the Arla plant where they're processing 1 billion litres a year for the UK market, so pretty important that they produce fluid milk there for their people, and of course we share that in common here in Canada, that we just love doing the same for people in Canada.
Well, and it actually fits with the discussion we're going to have today, Sarah, because we're going to talk about the latest in the trade war between the United States and, frankly, the world, but obviously more precisely with what's happening here in Canada and what's happening, especially as more and more conversations are bringing dairy back into it, with some of the things that have been in the news lately.
And there certainly has been a lot of them, because in July, Donald Trump moved forward with a significant escalation in the U.S. trade measures by introducing a 50% tariff increase on targeted Canadian imports under Section 338 of the U.S. Tariff Act of 1930.
According to the White House, these new tariffs are intended to address what President Trump has described as long-standing trade imbalances and to increase pressure on Canada through the ongoing trade discussions that have been happening.
And scheduled to take effect after 30 days if no deal is reached, the proposed surcharges would bypass the standard tariff exemptions provided under the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement and would directly target several key Canadian export sectors, including automotive, alcoholic beverages, and dairy.
So if implemented, these measures could represent an actual significant departure from the trade protections that have really established under CUSMA and could have substantial economic implications for very specific Canadian industries, for cross-border supply chains, and honestly, as we've seen over the last 18 months, for just the broader Canada-US trading relationship.
So to discuss all of this, we've invited David Wiens, President of Dairy Farmers of Canada, to tell us more about the aftermath of this announcement and to talk about practical ways dairy farmers can respond.
Coming up right next on the Canadian Podcast. A lot of people were surprised when on July 20th, the White House announced a 50% tariff hike on targeted Canadian imports under Section 338 of the U.S. Tariff Act of 1930. They went a long way back to find that one, Sarah.
Indeed. And while nothing seems surprising anymore in politics, this one really was surprising because these surcharges would bypass standard CUSMA exemptions and directly target automotive, alcohol, and of course, dairy.
According to the White House, and you saw it in lots of media reports as well, that the core driver behind the decision is Canada's dairy supply management system, with the White House highlighting restrictive tariff rate quotas on U.S. cheese compared to their European imported counterparts.
And, of course, if no deal is reached beforehand, the tariffs are set to take effect on August 19th, 2026.
That's why we've brought in the expert on this subject. Our guest today, President of Dairy Farmers of Canada, it's David Wiens. David, welcome back to the Canadian Podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, we're grateful to have you with us today, David. And we want to know, just for the listeners, a little bit more about this announcement and how we should be feeling. Not that you're one who can really deem how anyone should feel, but let us know from your perspective how things are looking at this point and what we might be expecting as farmers heading into this.
Sure. And, truthfully, we would just as soon not be on the radar once again. But dairy farmers do stand united with all Canadians in their concern about the impacts that these tariffs will have on the economies, actually on both sides of the border. And we know that our federal and provincial governments are working hard to defend Canadian interests, whether it's dairy or any other sectors of the economy. And so, we're looking for our government to defend Canadian interests and to find solutions that will be appropriate for all industries, all sectors, not just our own. And, at the same time, the U.S. has increased the pressure on our sector by targeting dairy in this latest round of tariffs. We recognize that. And over the past year and a half, we have seen there's been a lot of talk around dairy and trade. And yes, it's disappointing that yet again, we're in the spotlight. And at the same time, Canada has been acting in accordance with the terms of this agreement negotiated with the United States. And so what's at stake here is our food security and our power to make our own decisions about how Canada's milk is produced.
And David, you mentioned we have had the benefit of kind of flying under the radar the last 18 months or so, and we know that some of these alcohol tariffs are directly tied to the fact that certain liquor control boards are not selling U.S. alcohol. What's the underlying reason that dairy now gets kind of the unfortunate presence of center stage on this round?
Yeah, well, certainly it's not about the overall economic impact here. These new tariffs are really not about the reality of the U.S.-Canada dairy trade. While there are some, there will be some impact on some dairy exports, but really the Canadian dairy sector is mostly focused on supplying quality milk to Canadians first, and so this really seems like just another attempt to actually create leverage over the Canadian economy simply to extract further concessions. And, really, it's I think they're being very targeted in terms of how they're going to approach this.
It does feel tactical, I will say. And
Yeah.
I think I'm curious from your perspective, David, how a tariff on Canadian dairy exports will impact dairy farmers if that goes ahead and the sector at large, because I know it's not just dairy farmers here that we're concerned about, but also dairy processors, different stakeholders in the system.
Yeah, certainly. And the proposed tariffs are mostly dairy products in the powder form. So, that would be things like whey, concentrates, and lactose. And you're right, Sarah, there are certain, processors that will obviously more exposed to this than others. But this isn't just about, dollars and numbers. And if implemented, these measures will actually be very disruptive in terms of an integrated supply chains, like the North American supply chains. And it'll actually jeopardize processing jobs and also penalize food manufacturers. And we all recognize a healthy agricultural sector relies on predictable rules-based trade. So unilateral prohibitive tariffs harm businesses and consumers on both sides of the border. And that's what this seems to be attempting to do.
Now, if you listen to the president, obviously, then what we're doing is extremely unfair to, the U.S. Economy, to U.S. farmers, to all of that. What's your opinion on that? Do you think Canada's being unfair to the U.S. when it comes specifically to dairy, David?
Well, what I see here is the U.S. is targeting Canada over the terms that the first Trump administration actually negotiated and agreed to in CUSMA. So, and if you'll recall, at that time, President Trump called the original CUSMA agreement the fairest, and this is his words, the fairest, most balanced and beneficial trade agreement we have ever signed into law. And Canada has been acting in accordance with this deal, and it's disappointing then to see the U.S. take this approach now. And at the same time, we should not apologize for wanting a strong Canadian dairy sector that ensures a reliable supply of milk from Canadian farms produced to Canadian standards and that contributes to Canada's food sovereignty.
So I've heard you say in other interviews, David, that there's more dairy actually right now coming in from the United States than ever before. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so when you look at the numbers, it's really hard to dispute that CUSMA has been that it has in fact been very beneficial to the U.S. dairy sector. So let's look at the numbers, for example. In 2025, the U.S. had a large dairy trade surplus with Canada, exporting $1.06 billion of dairy products while importing $391 million of Canadian dairy products. So we see, that's so it's a balance that while it favors the U.S. by a very strong margin. And when we look at it, the exports of the U.S. dairy products to Canada have climbed over 150% in value compared to 2019 before CUSMA came into effect. And I think the other number that we should think about here is Canada is the U.S.'s second largest dairy export market after Mexico, just in terms of volumes. And when we want to look at the customer, like just in terms of the per capita consumption, Canada is actually the U.S.'s largest market. So imports of dairy products from the United States make up 55% of the value of Canada's total dairy imports. So clearly you can see how the United States has received the lion's share of the Canadian market place in terms of imports allowed.
Now, you mentioned that the last CUSMA negotiation was the fairest trade deal that had ever been negotiated and signed into law in the history of the world. And one of the key components that I hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, but it is around tariff rate quotas specifically, and what those TRQs, how they're administered, who gets basically to import, some of that product. Right now, a heavy focus is on processors. The U.S. doesn't want that. They would like to see more of that to retailers. Is this something that should be considered? Like, what's your thought in giving more TRQ room to retailers to get CUSMA moving?
Well, I think I'd just like to begin by reiterating that the way in which this trade agreement was negotiated by Canada and the U.S. and agreed to has been tested at an international trade panel, and the panel in fact came back and looked at what the dispute was about and what the negotiated trade deal was about, and they ruled that in fact Canada was within the agreement that had been agreed to. So as we've discussed, the U.S. has substantial access to the Canadian dairy market and is using it. That's important to note there. In addition to CUSMA, the U.S. also benefits from tariff-free dairy access under the WTO. So it's also important to remember that we've already given up a significant amount of market in previous deal, but that never. But the demands for more never seem to end here. And I said the bigger, as I've said, the bigger question of what's at stake here is our food security and the power to make our own choices about how Canada's milk is produced. So, we want to see this resolved, this whole trade dispute resolved as quickly as possible. And we're counting on the government to continue to defend all Canadian industries.
So clearly you're not going to say, yes, we should give TRQs to retailers. I mean, we know that's not a position that we would like to pursue at this point. What is the attraction then, would you say, for the US in seeking this kind of TRQ access, not just through processors? Because it seems to be a continuing irritant.
It's interesting that what has happened here is, they have been unhappy with it from the very beginning. But the point again is that this is what both parties agreed to originally. And so it's really, if they didn't get what they were expecting, that's kind of on them. But, what's really important here is that, trade agreements depend on respecting the rules. And the U.S. has challenged Canada's TRQ administration rules twice now. And the most recent, as I said earlier, the most recent dispute panel actually found Canada to be compliant with the treaty, and so rejected all of the U.S. claims. So that's where we stand now, and we certainly stand by that the Canadian dairy industry has already given up considerable access on that first CUSMA agreement. And so we stand by that. The agreement was negotiated by two parties. They both agreed, and that we need to stay with it.
David, we really do appreciate your insights. We don't want to let you go yet. We've got more to quiz you on, but we do need to take a short break. We'll have more on the latest trade war right after this.
Strong and free. It's not just in our anthem, it's in who we are. A freedom to choose what's best for us. That's why Canadian dairy farmers uphold some of the highest standards in the world, proudly helping to strengthen our communities. When you choose Canadian, you're making all of us stronger.
That's the Canadian way.
And we're back with David Wiens, president of Dairy Farmers of Canada. David, the White House says Canada discriminates against U.S. cheese. Is this actually true?
Well, again, Canada negotiated separate trade agreements with the United States and with the European Union, and each of it has its own negotiated market access commitments that are being respected. So that's where we stand. CUSMA was actually negotiated years after the agreement with the EU was concluded, and it provided the U.S. a negotiated amount of tariff-free access to the Canadian market in different categories, such as cheese, for example. And the U.S. has actually filled 86% of that access in 2025. And the imports of cheese from the U.S. more than doubled since CUSMA's implementation, both in terms of quantity and value. And, the Europeans have similar access under their trade deal, and they filled 94% in 2025. So the U.S. fill rates have consistently been growing over the course of the agreement, and the EU trade deal was negotiated years before CUSMA. So actually, if you want to compare the two, the U.S. is doing quite well in terms of the CUSMA trade deal. So it's hard to understand how Canada could be seen as being discriminatory when it is actually abiding by the negotiated terms of both agreements. And each trading partner is using this access successfully. So the answer to your question is no.
So there are a lot of voices out there, though, David, and we've definitely heard some say that Canadian farmers are holding the economy hostage. There's things being said that make it sound like this is really a giant problem. What do you have to say to these people?
Yeah, I would respond to them in this way, and that is that we should not be putting our food systems on the bargaining table. None of them. Canadian dairy is produced on Canadian farms for Canadians first. And based on everything we heard, it's clear that there are a number of important issues that have been raised in the context of CUSMA. To my understanding, there's not one thing that is holding it up. Canada, and we want to think back to it be about a year ago now, Canada made unilateral concessions on the digital services tax with little progress on negotiations. And it's simply followed by fresh demands for even more concessions in return. So it is unrealistic to expect that additional concessions would somehow yield positive results. And to me, it's important really to stand up for the things that benefit Canadians. Canadian dairy farmers are proud of the contributions that we make to Canada. We create we create jobs, and we do also drive economic activity in communities across Canada. And it's really important that, a lot of this activity happens in rural Canada. But we also strengthen the food sovereignty, all the while following some of the highest standards in the world. So I think those are very important things that we can do by producing our own food, by producing our own milk, for Canadians, by Canadians.
We mentioned off the top, David, that we're kind of in this middle of this 30-day window right now before some of these industries get their 50% tariffs. It has kind of put the negotiations for this, Kuzmin General, everything, kind of in a bit of a hyperdrive, it feels like, with lots of travel as we speak right now. The minister responsible for these negotiations, Dominic LeBlanc, is in Washington. The annual meeting for DFC was actually in New Brunswick, his home province, last month. Kind of between, his conversations and the comments he delivered at the AGM, along with, some of the conversations that I know you're having with officials on a very regular basis. Kind of what are you hearing that, maybe the rest of the dairy industry and us dairy farmers at home might not be hearing through the media?
Yeah, certainly. And you're right. Minister LeBlanc was indeed at our AGM, and we really appreciated his presence there. I know that he is in a very busy schedule, between what happens, on both sides of the border. So we really took a lot of comfort in that. And in his message to us was reassuring participants that his government and his word unequivocally stands on the supply management, what we have in supply management generally and in dairy specifically. He went on to say that they have made it abundantly clear to the Americans, both publicly and numerous times privately, that supply management is not on the negotiating table for discussion. And then we had Minister McDonald also attended our AGM and echoed Minister LeBlanc's strong support for our sector. So we are very grateful for that strong Canadian government support that we have, and they are absolutely committed to defending supply management at the negotiating table. But it still remains important to ensure a shared understanding that this means no dairy concessions of any kind. And that's an important message that we were able to reiterate there as well. And, clearly, we're counting on the government to continue to defend Canada's dairy farmers and our national food security as they continue to defend all Canadian industries. We stand together there.
Well, I did think that was really great, David, to see both of those gentlemen come out to our AGM. I know we hear all the time in the media about these people, and I have to say, for me, as someone who's met a lot of politicians doing this work, Minister LeBlanc was especially impressive in that meeting. He's such a personable guy. It really made you feel some connection, and I so appreciated having that opportunity because it felt like in the room, you could see how much people connected with him and actually felt like, yeah, okay, what he's saying is not just what he's, it is what he's trained to say, but also it just felt very authentic and very positive. And I really enjoyed that experience and seeing the fellow farmers take that in. So that was pretty cool. And of course, Minister McDonald popping in too was fantastic. So those words are there. We have to, I think, put some support in the government when it comes to that, but the trust is growing. And nonetheless, though, we see that we do have a letter writing campaign started at DFC again. And I think in my probably close to 10 years of doing this stuff. This is not the first time. We've had to do this a lot of times. We keep hearing things from the government, but we are coming forth with a letter writing campaign again, to your point, covering off what do we mean when we say no concessions and why does it matter now? So can you fill the farmers in on that and what the intent is, why we need to do it and why it's important?
We are hearing from Canadians who want to show their support for Canadian dairy farmers. And this is a great way for them to do that. So it's giving them the tools to be able to support us. Because we know that, some of the recent NANO's polling shows that 9 in 10 Canadians want to maintain control over our food supply. And I think for many Canadians, this has really become a flashpoint in terms of this whole negotiation and also the importance of food sovereignty, food security. It's really important. And for us to reach out to all Canadians to help us carry that message across the government, I think there's real strength in that. There's real strength if we can, stand as Canadian dairy farmers together with all Canadians and convey the message to our government that, this is not up for negotiation. We have to protect this. And I think that this also gives the Canadian government a lot more strength going forward too, when they can in fact see this isn't just about Canadian dairy farmers. This is about Canadians in general that are saying, look, food security, food sovereignty is really important to us. And we want you to defend that in terms of these trade discussions that are ongoing at the current time.
Well, I think it's you mentioned the 9 in 10 number, David, and I think it goes really well with the numbers that I actually just saw, within the last couple of days that talk about how Canadians really don't want to give more up right now. They are ready to kind of dig their heels in the sand and say, enough with being pushed around through these negotiations. It certainly makes me feel good that, we do seem to have Canadians on our side with this. At the same time, how important is it for government to hear from farmers and Canadian at the same time to just reinforce that message?
Well, first of all, when the government looks at, whatever the issues are, I think they always look to hear, well, first of all, what is the impact that the industry has on the economy overall? But also, very importantly, the government looks to see, what kind of support, like there's strong support. They know our contributions to the Canadian economy. They know that we don't rely on subsidies and that sort of thing to produce milk, for Canadians. And so that's very important. But also that added strength is just from people saying, we also want to, support. We want that Canadian milk and Canadian dairy products on our store shelves, and so when they get that kind of support happening, that's when the Canadian government really really takes note. And I should also add that it's not just between the Canadian dairy farmers and Canadians. It's also Canadian dairy processors that are very much on the same page in terms of defending, that they're carrying similar messages, in terms of defending what we do as Canadian dairy farmers, the Canadian dairy sector overall.
So we've talked a lot about the dairy sector, but I know that we have plenty of times daily talked about other industries in Canada as well. So why should Canadians care about this if they're more worried about tariffs or manufacturing, the cost of living, all these things? What makes this matter an issue that should be priority?
Well, it's really what it is that dairy farmers should be standing, with all Canadians and Canadian industries who are impacted by tariffs. And at the same time, protecting Canada's domestic food production is also a vital national interest, which was recently recognized by the government's new national food security strategy, which specifically acknowledged the important role of supply management. And so I think we have to bear that in mind. And so really, at the end of the day, this isn't about choosing one sector over another. It's about ensuring Canada continues to have a strong and resilient economy and food system. So, these are the reasons why we are encouraging, all dairy farmers to actually participate in this letter writing campaign as well. DFC has launched this on our website, ourcountry.ourmilk.ca, and that is to rally Canadians in support of dairy farmers and the national food sovereignty. And the government continues to defend supply management in light of the most recent U.S. threats. We think it's necessary to convey to decision makers how strongly Canadians feel about protecting our dairy sector and how important it is to hold the line and to ensure that there's no more dairy concessions that are granted in this trade negotiation. And so that's why we're asking Canadians to send those letters directly to the government by filling out the form that's available on ourcountry.ourmilk.ca. And this will also be accompanied with ads on social media to reinforce the benefits that dairy brings, in particular for food security, for jobs, resilient rural communities, and of course our high standards that go into the production of our milk. So all this is to build public support and rally Canadians around the protection of our sector and supply management. So, that's where we're asking dairy farmers to share this site with family, friends, and colleagues so we can really get the message out there. And certainly, just getting back to the whole big picture, we don't think that there should be any Canadian industry that is used as a bargaining chip here. And, we're involved, of course, in the food production, in agriculture. And so, that is our priority. But at the same time, we just think it's really important to protect all of Canada's industries, even with all the pressures that there are. But yeah, so we hope that that will continue.
Well, and I do love that message myself, David, just in terms of, yes, we have our interests and we have the things we want to protect. But, at the end of the day, we're Canadians like everybody else and want to protect the country as a whole. And so we are kind of one piece to that puzzle. But if we can all stand together as Canadians, to kind of back each other up, and that nobody ends up being a bargaining chip, I think it really works well for all Canadians. So as we as dairy farmers, are kind of coasting through summer is a strong word for it. We are slaving away through summer here at trying to get all the, feed in and hay done and, harvest going and all those types of things. What are some last thoughts you have for dairy farmers as, we have a lot of seat time to think about and, some are probably worried about, the things they're hearing in the news. Others are, kind of fierce and want to stand behind the industry. What's your feeling on this? What do you think farmers should be thinking about as they continue to sit in a tractor cab this summer?
Yeah, well, what I see this as an opportunity, like we're given an opportunity to have a say in how these trade negotiations go. And I look at it as, it's really important from my perspective to do as much as we possibly can. And time is of the essence. It's not to wait until, we have more time and things really slow down. The letters that we submit is so important. The more our voice will resonate with decision makers. So we really have to think about the kind of impact that we can have as farmers. And if we spread this message too, to our friends and family, like each one of them can pick this up a notch. And again, like I said before, we've heard so much interest in and so much support for what we do. It's interesting because sometimes after an interview, we'll get we will get emails from Canadians saying, right on, really support this, keep up the good work, and some, and the whole idea is what can we do to help? So as I see it, when it comes to this letter writing campaign, for example, and that's something that we can all do, whether we're dairy farmers or whether any Canadian can do this. And so basically, every letter counts. And I would say go to our website, ourcountry.ourmilk.ca today and check it out and become involved. And we will continue to build a strong Canadian dairy sector and also a strong country.
Oh yeah, lots of opportunity to get involved if you want to, guys. Just reach out to any of us, David, myself. Yeah, there's plenty of opportunity to be involved even further in leadership if you're so inclined. And I must say, we picked something up cool online here, David, before you go. The Canadian Podcast wanted to congratulate you because we noticed that your farm has reached a major milestone this month, which is its 100th anniversary. So I wanted to congratulate you, your brother, and your team, and just give you the opportunity to say some words to that because it, in fact, long predates supply management in Canada.
All right. Yeah, thank you. And yes, a lot of credit given to supply management. I mean, it was just, a year or two ago, I started to think about, that connection between, I always knew my grandparents had settled on this farm in 1926. And it's like, a year or two ago, it's like, oh, we're approaching 2026 here. And there has to be some recognition. So for us, it was, farming together with my brother and our families. It was important for us to just, take some time to bring the community together. And we had about 250 people come join us on that celebration on that day. We set up a big tent, and it was and I thought it was really important to also honor the people that have been here before us. We happen to be in the privileged position of being in the right place at the right time. But if it hadn't been for my, my parents and grandparents and families that have been before us, well, this opportunity wouldn't have arisen. And of course, and then I look at it in a broader sense too. It's not just the farm. Again, it's about community, whether it would include, churches, neighbors, friends, everybody in some way, sooner or later on the farm, as you know, you do rely on someone else to make things happen. And so it was a fantastic day. We had beautiful weather that day. And so, yeah, it was great. At the end, we did the tour, like the barn tours. We actually developed a historical video from the farm over the last, that kind of showing the last 100 years. And so we had that cycling through at the same time. So people would take turns doing tours, doing the video, watching the video. And then my sister was giving hay rides for the kids and young at heart. So we had, I think we had pretty much all bases covered.
Well, sounds like an awesome day, and definitely congratulations to you and your family, and all the best and success for the next 100 years. So yeah. That's wonderful. David Wiens, president of Dairy Farmers of Canada. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Canadian Podcast.
Well, thank you.
So, folks, you've heard it directly from the president of DFC. Go on to ourcountry.ourmilk.ca. Sign the letter, spread it around to your friends and family, get it on your socials, let Canadians know to show their support. I feel like it's important to spread the word, Andrew. This is our chance to amplify and do a little something on the farm outside of our daily to just get the message out there and make sure we're being heard.
Well, and I will tell you, it's one of those things that you never know when you're told to do one of these things. Like, well, how long will it take? Do I have time to do this? So I actually did it. Don't tell David now that he's left us, but I actually did it in his last answer just to see how easy it was. Super easy. You go in, you fill your name, it fills it helps populate the letter for you, and I was done in that short amount of time. So if you go to ourcountry.ourmilk.ca, I promise you can press the auto steer button while you're cutting hay. Do it before you hit the end of the row. You'll be fine.
You don't have to customize it. Don't have to make it fancy. Just get it in there. Get it done.
Absolutely. A huge thanks to our guest, David Wiens, president of DFC, and a huge thank you to all of you for joining us today. We truly appreciate you taking the time to be with us and hope that you found today's discussion informative and valuable.
And of course, to stay up to date on our latest news, analysis, and upcoming events, be sure to follow us on Blue Sky, X, Facebook, and YouTube, where we regularly share updates and new content. And it's important you stay current because things are changing all the time.
They are changing very rapidly. So if you hear it and you have questions, comments, suggestions for future topics, we'd love to hear from you. All you have to do is send us an email, podcast@canadianpodcow.ca.
This podcast wouldn't have been possible without the support of our sponsor, the Dairy Farmers of Canada.
And of course, a heartfelt thanks to our exceptional production team. It's Bruce Sargent and Carl Belanger. Your unwavering support and behind-the-scenes excellence makes this podcast possible. You know what? Carl writes this for us, Sarah, and it's getting to be longer and longer descriptions of how supportive we are of them.
Unwavering is a new one.
Support.
Anyway, we do appreciate them sincerely. Thanks everyone for listening and for your support. We look forward to connecting with you again soon on another episode of the Canadian Podcast.